Immigration policy is taking center stage at the state capitol today. Republican leaders are rolling out a sweeping set of bills, all aimed at cracking down on people here in the country illegally. As WSMV4 investigative reporter Stacey Cameron reports, state lawmakers are working hand in hand with the White House on these plans, and if it passes, Tennessee could soon become one of the toughest states in the nation when it comes to illegal immigration.
The message Republicans are sending with this package of bills is clear. If you're an illegal immigrant in the state of Tennessee, you're not welcome. And if you're a city or a police agency, you better get on board with enforcing federal immigration policy or risk losing state sales tax money. Now, Republican leaders in both the House and Senate revealed their immigration agenda at a press conference marking the end of the first week of the new legislative session. If passed, we'd see new laws blocking undocumented kids from enrolling in public schools. Police departments, city governments, and judges would be required to cooperate with ICE agents and DHS, and anyone applying for public benefits at any level in Tennessee would have to prove their immigration status. State Republican leadership admit they're working with the Trump administration to craft these bills, and while Democrats say this shows Republican priorities are in the wrong place and this isn't something most Tennesseans want, Republicans say these bills will keep undocumented immigrants from illegally tapping into taxpayer benefits.
If you're here legally and lawfully, then we have things that we can help you with. If you're here illegally and you broke the law to get here, then unfortunately, Tennessee's not going to be a state where you can get sanctuary.
It's hate-filled legislation, and it's a distraction technique from their own failures. These people have blown up our state budget, driven us off the fiscal cliff. They think affordability is a hoax.
When asked, Speaker Cameron Sexton said he didn't have a tab for how much these new bills would cost, but said right now there would be savings, claiming that undocumented immigrants in Tennessee cost the state $1 billion a year. That's a figure Democrats say are made up without any figures to support. Reporting at the state capitol, I'm WSMV4 investigative reporter Stacey Cameron.